done something like this to me, I am going to get you once and for all!
Juice. The term money mark gets thrown around quite a bit in wrestling circles. NWA owner Billy Corgan, AEW owner and founder Tony Khan, podcast host Conrad Thompson, and others have been labelled with this term, often derisively so, because they're supposedly wrestling fans who have used their personal wealth to become involved with the wrestling industry. But there is a guy who lives up to the money mark moniker in the best way. Someone who died the way he was born, covered in cocaine powder and Vaseline. And that crazy bastard's name was Herb Abrams. Herb Abrams was a businessman from New York who had fond memories of the golden age of 80s wrestling. The overall popularity of wrestling had dwindled significantly since 1990, and Abrams felt that a return to the glitz, glamour, and larger-than-life characters of the 80s was a goldmine for the cunning entrepreneur. Plus, it would allow him opportunity to use tremendous amounts of cocaine. Herb had the thought that a new promotion filled with the biggest names from the 80s heyday would find an audience with fans who, like him, were not interested in the current WWF or WCW products of the time, and despite having absolutely zero experience in the wrestling business in his life, he founded the UWF and set to work recruiting his stars. Among the bigger names he signed to the UWF roster were Paul Orndorff, Steve Williams, Don Morocco, Bob Orton Jr., Brian Blair, Danny Spivey, Billy Jack Haynes, Ken Patera, Colonel De Beers, David Sammartino, and Cactus Jack, who would go on to become Mankind, of course. David's father, the legendary Bruno Sammartino, signed on as a commentator alongside Abrams to lend the show a sense of legitimacy, which, believe me, even for a wrestling show, the UWF desperately needed. This is why, in my opinion, the term money mark is so apropos for Abrams. He refused to take advice from people who knew the wrestling business, assuming his money would fix any obstacles he encountered. Well, wrestlers love money, but they also know a sucker when they see one, and they were all too happy to accept Herb's fat checks and cocaine hors d'oeuvres. Armed with his money and the sense of invisibility a man feels when he replaces his blood with opioids, Abrams made his first power play in the wrestling business. He stole the old UWF name from Bill Watts' old territory, trading off of the recognition that name had with wrestling fans, hoping they'd be tricked into watching his wrestling show, even though the two different UWF shows look about as similar as the Fabulous Moolah's tits. So we've got a drug-addicted yuppie who knows nothing about wrestling, running a promotion he thinks is about to outgun the WWF. It's a recipe for disaster, the kind of thing 2020 would have a field day with if they were still legitimate journalists. But Herbie was actually quite forward-thinking, all things considered. Besides the foresight to trademark the UWF name, which Bill Watts himself had never thought to do, he created merchandise and t-shirts, something that big companies like WCW were still hardly doing by that point. Somehow, Abrams managed to get a TV deal with the sports channel. Somehow, he managed to book the MGM Grand as a venue for the UWF. He had the talent, he had a network, he had an arena, he had all the tools that one would need to make a go of it in the wrestling business. Unfortunately, his brain was also 89% cocaine, so while he had the TV deal, UWF hardly ever filmed their events with any regularity, let alone air them at consistent times. And when they did air, it looked as though a community college film class that broke into Herb's stash had made the show. And all of these factors made the audience tune out more and more after the initial first few episodes. Herb was also the booker for UWF. That's right. With zero experience and zero idea, this neophyte wrestling promoter was for 2 years in control of the images and careers of some of the most legendary names in the history of the business. After a while, he began to accept that he had no fucking clue what he was doing and handed the booking reins over to some weird guy who had some experience in the business as a manager, and who tried unsuccessfully to get people to care again about the UWF. In the meantime, the wrestlers continued taking advantage of Herb's money, and the make-believe world of wrestling was beginning to make Herb paranoid. Well, a lot of it was probably the cocaine, but the point is, he didn't know who he could trust. Herb got it in his head that a young stud, one of his wrestlers named Wildman Stevie Ray, had stolen coke and money from him and also fucked his wife. Herb did what any man in his situation would have done. He paid Dr. Death Steve Williams a staggering $100 to break Stevie Ray's nose in their match. I don't know what's sadder, the fact that Abrams would sabotage his own show by exacting revenge on live TV, or the fact that Dr. Death so readily accepted the task for such little compensation. Either way, he fucking broke Stevie's nose. It later turned out that Stevie hadn't fucked Herb's wife, and probably safe to assume Herb wasn't fucking her either, because she wasn't made of cocaine. A flame burning twice as long could never have been so bright. As weird of a comparison as this is going to sound, I view Herb Abrams' UWF in a similar vein to TNA wrestling. Both are examples of huge potential in a promotion going unrealized. Both were able to sign big-name talents who weren't putting their hearts into the job and hanging around for a paycheck and an easy schedule. Both were run by novice promoters who had had success in other arenas but could never get control of the highly unpredictable and very unique business model of professional wrestling. And both organizations were also able to secure TV and pay-per-view, but it still wasn't enough ultimately to sustain them in the long run. And as far as Herb Abrams, well, despite all of my jokes throughout the video, addiction is a disease, and very sadly, Herb was never able to overcome his dependence on cocaine. The police were called to his hotel on the night that he died because he'd been running around terrorizing the prostitutes he had hired and trashing the hotel room. A more 80s scenario you could not find. When the police got there, Herb had already died of a cocaine-induced cardiac arrest, in nothing but his underwear, covered in a layer of Vaseline and a coating of cocaine powder over his entire body. As sad as it is to see, that son of a gun had one hell of a final night on this earth. And for that, Herb, I salute you, good sir. So that was a brief overview of Herb Abrams' wild few years in the professional wrestling game, and the indelible mark he was able to leave in that brief little sojourn. That's it for now. Be sure to subscribe if you like this so you don't miss another video, and consider supporting Juice on Patreon for exclusive episodes and bonus content for just $5 a month. See you next time, slapdicks.